Hey guys, welcome to the Outshipping YouTube channel. My name's Austin, and in today's video we're going to be continuing to work on my 99 Jeep Cherokee by adding some lower door armor. Now today I'm going to show you guys how to do the passenger side because we're pretty much all done with that. If you guys saw my last two previous videos, I cut out all the floor rust on the passenger side, patched that all up, and also add some new 2x6 rockers because the old rocker was all rusted out. So now today we're going to continue working with the doors, and then for the most part on the passenger side all the body work is going to be complete. Now I got a new set of doors I'm going to be throwing on this Jeep. They're a little bit better, they're not perfect, so we'll have a little bit of rust to deal with. So let's get started. Alright, so this is a lower door armor that we're going to be installing on the Jeep today. I got it off of eBay, and the company is 7blacksmiths.com, but it's made in China unfortunately. But they come with both sides and a bag of hardware, and this is nice 1/8" steel, so that should work pretty good for us today. I did originally want to go with aluminum, but those kits are at least $200, so I decided to go with the low buck option. Overall, my first impressions on it, it is pretty stout. And it's nice that it came with hardware. One thing I don't like right off the bat is that these are 3/8 holes or maybe even a little bit bigger, and this is 5/16 hardware right here. So it's nice if you drill the holes and they're not exactly perfect, you can adjust it, but there is a possibility that if it's too far off, there's a little bit of the hole that's exposed that the bolt does not cover up. So I didn't really like that, and since I live in the Rust Belt, these are probably just zinc plated hardware. So instead of using this stuff right here, I went on McMaster-Carr and actually got all stainless hardware, and I got it in the 3/8 size. I also went and got some flange nuts that lock onto the back side, so they're locking flange nuts. I also went and got some 3/8 nut certs that I can install in the hard areas where I can't put a nut on the back side. Now if you guys saw from my last video on the front fender, which is what this little piece goes onto, I did cut off a little bit on the bottom, so we're going to have to address that when we fit this up and cut it off as well, so that way it doesn't stick down too low. But basically what we're going to be doing is cleaning up the doors anywhere where there's a little bit of rust bubbling, and PR15 the bottom of the door, so that way no rust continues on it. It doesn't have to be perfect color matched or anything, since these are going to go right over it. And then I'm going to scuff these up since there is some slight surface rust kicking in, since these are bare steel. I will prime and paint the backside black, and then I do have some color matching red that actually matches pretty good. I tested it on a new fuel door that I put on, and sprayed that on there, put some clear, and it actually matches pretty well. So let's go take a quick look at the doors that I have so we can bolt these onto there. Alright, so these are all the doors that I have available for the passenger side. So this front passenger door right here, this is what came off of it, as well as this one back here, and you can see the bottoms of the doors, they're not exactly solid. This one's actually pretty bad right here, and both the front and rear panel are separated from itself, and it's going to take a lot of work to get these back into shape. So I got some new doors over here, which is this one and this one. I actually got all 4 doors for this, even the driver's side, for around $50. So it's kind of a steal, but unfortunately they're not exactly perfect. So with these doors, since the previous owner, they just wanted to get them off as fast as they could, they just took a Sawzall and cut the hinges. Luckily you don't need that for the Jeep since it's welded onto the Jeep, so I just unbolted it from where it's on the door, and then I should be able to bolt it up to the Jeep just fine. But unfortunately they also cut the wiring harness instead of unplugging it, so I'll have to swap the old wiring harness from the old doors onto the new ones. Now I did get a little bit ahead of myself on some of the new doors. Since the wiring harness is already cut, I actually cut off the pigtails on here so we can test and see if the window regulator is working, as well as the door lock actuator. So you can plug that in and then take a 12-volt battery. I just use an M12 battery, stick these in there, and it gives it some power, and then you can flip the polarity and make sure it's working the opposite way as well. So I tested them on the new doors, so those are good to go, so I don't have to swap any other components. I might still swap the glass because it looks like some aftermarket tint on here, and it actually is starting to peel, so I'll just probably swap the old glass into there as well. And then off camera on the old doors, I'm going to strip them down completely and probably scrap them, and then keep any of the extra parts to sell, or if I need it in the future I can easily swap that on. So I'm going to start off with one of the new doors over here, so I'll go with the smaller one, put that up on the table, and then we'll see what we're working with as far as the rust, and swap the components, and then we'll start marking out the holes where we have to drill to put lower door armor on, drill those through, and then start prepping it for paint as well as on the lower door armor. Alright, so I got one of the doors up here on the table so we can work with it a little bit up closer. Be careful when lifting these doors because I just pinched something in my back, so you don't want that to happen. But right away we can see we do have a little bit of rust. Unfortunately, it went through both of the front and rear skins of the doors on the bottom here, but I'm going to end up probably having to cut that off. It still is a little bit cleaner than the previous door, which had rust here and was also all along the bottom, so it is a little bit better. Now I did get a little bit ahead of myself on the door trim right here, so if you still have your door trim on here, so if you do have a trim panel removal tool, you can pry that under here and carefully remove this. It does have some double-sided tape on the back of it, and some of it might still stick to the door, so I already got that off and took some mineral spirits to clean up any other residue that's on there. Now for fitting up these lower door armor pieces, basically you sit down here and you want to make sure that it's all the way in the gap right where it's bent on both sides, so that way it's on there nice and square. Now one thing I'm going to do is when I mount these onto here, I want to make sure I position this so that way it's away from this hinge point right here as far away as possible, because when this door hinges it actually folds behind the front door and we don't want this edge to get caught on the door in front of it, so we want to make sure we have enough clearance for that. Same thing on the front door, since it does fold behind that front fender, so we're going to kind of position it back here and leave a little bit of a gap right here as well. Now when laying this on there, you're not going to get it 100% because this piece on the door is actually slightly curved and this is a straight piece of metal, but when we bolt it on, hopefully it's going to suck that all into place. So I got mine laid on here exactly where I want it. Now I'm going to take a Sharpie and put it in the center of the holes, and then we're going to start drilling these out to 3/8. And once we have that drilled out, we're going to see where we're going to have to necessarily install a nut cert, where we can't put a nut on the back side, and then get that all installed, and then we'll address the rust and then start painting this, and then we can install it. Alright, so I got everything marked, and now I'm going to go and start drilling this out here. I'm going to start with an 1/8 inch bit and work my way up to a 3/8. I'm probably not going to drill out this hole over here since I'm going to cut out some of that rust anyway, so I'll hold off on that bottom right corner. But basically we can access the bolt from the inside of the door with the holes in the middle. On the outside, it's actually on the outside back side of the door, so technically on the outside of the door we can get a nut on the back side. And on the bottom left, it looks like it is going through a little bit of a wall between the two skins, so I might have to install a nut cert on this one. So I'm going to get started and drill these out. If you have a set punch, you can use that, but I lost mine, so hopefully these don't wander on me. That's interesting. I think these doors have been fixed before, because that's a little bit of Bondo that's on the bottom. Alright, so with my holes drilled, I'm going to double check, make sure it's in the center of the hole on this door armor, so that way nothing wanders too much. Alright, so everything's looking pretty good. I'm going to take a 3/8 bit, do the same thing, and enlarge them. Alright, so I got all the holes drilled. I actually went ahead and drilled this one. The back side is actually not blown all the way through, so that's good. And I think the drill bit is a little bit smaller, so these are actually we're able to thread into the sheet metal. We still will add some nuts on the back side, but at least helps for now for holding this into place. We do have to address this bottom left hole over here. Because of that structural piece, it actually made the hole wander over up in this direction a little bit. So what I think I'm going to do is take an angle grinder and actually cut off that little wall that's in the way, so that way I can fit a nut nicely on the back side there, and then we'll get this hole all squared away. So I'm going to flip it upside down and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. So you might be able to see right here, that's kind of where my drill bit was trying to poke through, but it ended up just kind of following this curve and then went onto the inside. So I might just cut out a little section right there, so that way the bolt goes in nice and straight. But as you can see from the back side, this is where that little lip is, where the bolt is exposed. And I think I'm going to have to cut that bolt off a little bit because it's going to protrude when we shut the door. I should have got a little bit smaller bolts, probably 1/2 inch. These ones are 1 inch long, so it's a little bit long for what we're doing. But we do have some buildup of rust. As you can see, it's kind of severe over here, but I don't think it's too bad. If we get all the scaly stuff off, we should be able to PR-15 the bottom back of these doors over here and make it nice and solid. Alright, so I got a little square marked out, so hopefully I can cut that out right there with a cutoff wheel. Alright, so not the prettiest, but I think it'll work. It should give us nice clearance for that bolt to go through, and we'll flip it over and test it and drill that out so it's nice and straight. Pop that bolt through. Alright, so we got them all into place. And overall, I think it did pretty well on the alignment. Got a little bit of gap on this side for the door hinge, and it's pretty much flush over here on the end of the door. And there is going to be a little bit protruding over here, about roughly 1/4 of an inch, but it is all the way seated down in this bend in the door, so that's what we were looking for. And honestly, for this door, I don't think I actually need to install a nut cert. I can get everything from the backside with just a standard nut, so I think I'm pretty good on this. So that's pretty nice. The only thing I got to do is once I install this for the last time, I'll have to cut down these bolts that are in the door jamb area, so that way they don't hit anything when it closes the door. Alright, so narrowing in on our rust spots, I put a little line around where all the rust is, and basically I'm going to cut out the outer skin of the door. I think the back is still pretty strong. I don't necessarily want to cut out the whole corner completely, but just anywhere where the rust is really bad, so that way we can get the rust to stop and then not spread any further. But I'm just going to start cutting, and if we ended up having to cut all the way through, we might patch that with a little bit of sheet metal for structural support, but we'll see where it takes us. Alright, so a little update. I decided I'm just going to cut it out completely and just weld in a new little piece right here. We can see the front skin is up here on the top and the bottom skin was welded to the bottom. I had to cut out over here because it was rusted through. But I'm just going to simply fix it with one piece of metal, and I just got a piece of scrap metal from when I did the floors. I'm going to weld it right into here, and it's only going to be 1 layer thick, but that's fine because we're really only going to see this bottom 1/4 inch edge since the thing is going to mostly go over it. So I'm going to weld this into place and then mark where the new shape of the door corner is going to go and cut that out. So I did confirm that these doors actually have been worked on. As you can see, this is the Bondo layer on it, and it smells like Bondo when you sand through it. I can also see some sanding marks that are underneath the paint when they repainted these doors. So I'm going to get this all fitted up, put some weld-through primer on the back side and the inside of the door here where it's all going to get covered up, then spot weld it into place, cut it out, and then grind everything down so it looks nice and good. Alright, so I got that welded in and cut out. I was able to weld from the back side as well, so that's where most of the strength's from, because it would be perfect if this would actually weld decent, but it's just like paper thin, so a lot of holes here, but I did get some penetration on it, so it's actually nice and solid, and then we can plug up the holes with some seam sealer. But now I'm going to work on getting this prep for POR 15, wire wheel it a little bit more, and mostly on the back side where the surface rust is, and then we'll start painting it. Alright, so I got this wire wheeled all down here and it's looking good down to bare metal. Now I'm going to go and put a couple coats of POR 15 on the inside and on the outside where we welded it in. Then we'll seal it up, quickly spray it with some red paint where we're going to see on the bottom right here, so that way it looks good from the outside. And then we'll start priming in our new lower door armor and get that ready for paint as well. Alright, so as we're waiting for some coats of paint to dry, I'm going to tackle this front door right here. It's not as bad as the other door, but I think I'm just going to cut off this corner right here and weld in a little piece of metal like we did before. But overall it's not rusty in the middle, but it looks like someone did kringle this corner or if the door fell or something, but it's not rusty, but I might be able to hammer that back into place so that way the door armor can slide over it nicely. But I'm going to start off with removing this trim panel right here. It's already coming up, so I'm just going to keep peeling it away from the door. Then I find it best just to use your fingernail, just kind of peel away on this double-sided tape, and it tends to come up nice. Then we can clean it with some mineral spirits. Alright, so I got that corner all taken care of, welded in a new little piece of sheet metal right there, and now we're ready to mark out the holes on our lower door armor for the front door here. So I'm going to do the same technique as before, put it right in the middle and start drilling them out with an 1/8 inch and then go to 3/16. Once again, for this door, I think we can pretty much get onto the back side of all these bolt holes, but we'll know for sure once we punch a hole through, and then we'll see where the hole ends up. Now, one thing I had to do with this armor was actually cut off 3/16 to 1/4 inch just in length, because it was a little bit long. Actually stuck out just a hair past the doors, but I do want to keep that clearance for that hinge area right up here. So I have this slid all the way back to pretty much where it's flush on the back of the door right here. And then we do have 3/16 before the end of the door right here. So there's a little bit of a gap. So hopefully once we install this door and have this armor on, it's not going to get jammed up into that door hinge. So I'll get this marked out. And I was able to pound out this corner a little bit. It's still like bent down a little, but I think once we get that bolt in there, it's going to kind of suck it all together and help us straighten out that corner a bit. Now we'll start drilling these out. Now we'll drill them out to a 3/8. Not too bad. A couple holes watered on me, unfortunately, but we'll have to just wall them out a little bit. I'm going to start putting in some bolts to kind of hold it in place. Alright, not too bad. Looks like we only got 2 holes that moved on us, so we'll just clean them up a little bit and stick them through. I think using a drill bit that's slightly smaller than 3/8 is the way to go for lining these up, so that way it kind of threads into it. You don't have to worry about putting nuts in the back right away. Just for mocking up purposes, it saves a little bit of time. Alright, that's looking good. So off camera, I used a hammer and actually kind of hammered up a little bit on this corner, and because of this plate's right on the other side of it, it actually hammered nicely to this metal right here, so now it's following the shape of the door armor. So pretty much this corner is all ready to go, and same thing with our lower door armor. Now I'm going to take it off, prep it for some PR15, put a couple coats on that, and then we'll jump over to the other door. Since it is the next day here now, I want to see if we can get that back door mounted on the Jeep. Then we'll paint a couple other little things and then put on our new lower door armor that's all painted up. While we're at it, we can also paint up this one as well. We got to primer it, put black paint on the back, red paint in the front, and then clear coat it. Alright, so on our door armor, I got both sides primed in, and now on the back side I'm just going to use some black paint because that red paint that I have for the front side is a little bit expensive, so I'm going to fill that in with black where no one's going to see it. Then we'll let that dry and paint the red on the front. Alright, so for the red paint that we're going to be painting on the outside, I got this duplicate covered perfect match. It's for the flame red paint code, which is PR4, and that's what's on this Jeep. And it matches pretty perfectly from the other trim panels that I painted up, so I'm going to use this on the front. Alright, so now we got our base coat down. We're going to shoot it with some clear. I got some Rust-Oleum crystal clear enamel, so we'll hit this over a few coats and then it should be nice and shiny. Alright, so now I'm going to attempt to put the rear door on here. I'm not going to get it perfectly dialed in since we still have to put the front door on and we have to check all the gaps and everything like that, but at least we can get it up here and somewhat mounted to finish assembly on that rear door. Now as far as bolts on this, I believe they are an M8. The factory Torx ones are just such a pain in the butt, especially trying to get in here with the Torx bit, so I went out and bought all new bolts just with a standard hex head. So I'm going to fit this up in here, put a couple bolts on, and then we have a variety of different shims that came off of the doors that were on here and then the new doors that I got, so I can play with different depths and everything like that once we get it dialed in. Alright, so I think I got the rear door dialed in. I can close it nicely, and it seems to match up with the body lines that go on the other side of the vehicle. You can't get it perfect. I mean, on the Jeep it's not going to be perfect like newer car. But what I ended up doing for the back is actually using the thicker shims, because that's what it was over there. I had the thinner shims on first and the body gap was just too big over here. So the shims are basically going to adjust the door from left to right. So I got the lines looking pretty decent over here, and then there's a lot of adjustability for the door going up and down as well as in and out. So you want to make sure it's nice and tight up against the seal. On my last Jeep, I actually had this top side out a little bit, and then whenever it rained, it actually dripped through the seals. So you want to make sure that's nice and tight in there. Now, a little technique I used, since these hex bolts, you really can't get them from the inside of the door like you could with the old bolts, is I actually threw in a couple old bolts, one on each hinge, and left the other hex bolts loose and adjusted it that way. So I had the door closed and just kind of moved it up and down and then tightened it with the Torx since I can get in here, and then I opened it and then tightened down the rest of the bolts. So I'm going to leave a couple factory Torx bolts in there until we get the other door lined up in case we still have to move it a little bit, but I think it's pretty much where it's going to sit. Now, one thing I noticed right off the bat is that one of the bolt holes for the door armor on this door actually is really close to this bottom hinge right here. Actually, I don't even think I can get the nut in there at all. So unfortunately, there really wasn't any good planning when they cut the holes on these door armors. I might end up just having to glue that bolt into place just for show purposes if the other bolts hold it nicely tight in there. But as you can see with the PR15 dry on there, it did a good job on covering it, but there is still a little bit of a gap right here where I had some little bit of holes from welding on there. Since it didn't weld the greatest, but I think I'm going to use some seam sealer and just kind of go over that nicely and seal that up. And I think I'm going to put the lower door armor on right away as well. I still do want to paint up the edges over here with some red paint, because you will see that. I think I'm going to do that after it's on. So I'm just going to clean this up with some mineral spirits so we got a nice clean surface for our seam sealer. Alright, so the seam sealer that we're going to be using is this Dynatron Seam Sealer Gray. It's made by 3M, really good stuff. You guys have seen me use it before in my last couple videos, and it works pretty well, dries nice and hard. Alright, so this stuff dries pretty quick, so we're going to have to work pretty fast on getting this down on there, and then putting our door armor on. Now I'm going to go through the backside feed on our nuts, and then we'll get that tightened up. And it looks like we do have plenty of clearance over here. It's not running into the door jamb with these longer ones, but I still might cut it down later after the fact. So I got a nut on the inside of the door with the 9/16 wrench on there, and I'll just tighten this down. When I bought these bolts and nuts, I made sure they're stainless steel, so I shouldn't have to use some anti-seize on this. Alright, so I got this lower door armor all bolted on, and what I did off camera was with this bolt up here where the hinge is directly behind it, there really wasn't any way to get a nut on that at all, so I ended up just cutting this down so it's like 3/16 of thread sticking out. And luckily enough, since the hole was a little bit small, I was able to thread it through the door sheet metal, and I didn't tighten it down crazy tight, just enough to so basically it holds in there. There's no really big gaps or anything like that, so pretty much this thing is here just for show, but it's really a bad design, whoever laid out these holes. It's not just this one, but with the other ones, they just had them in a really bad spot, so I wouldn't recommend getting this kit if you're going to get some lower door armor. Now, as far as looking on the back side, you can see I also cut down the bolts over here where it's going to be exposed. It wasn't running into anything, but it just gives it a little bit cleaner look. And with that notch we cut out in the corner, I was able to easily fit that nut in that quarter there, so it sucked it down. Had to put a different style nut over here since the flange nut was just too big for this area and was running into this surface. But as far as the inside of the door, as you can see, we got our 2 bolts coming in there. No clearance issues with that, so I just left them as long like that since no one's going to see it. Nothing contacts it, even the window, so we're all clear on that. So I will have to go back later and touch up any paint, especially in these corners where you see a little bit of that black PR15 showing. I'll just have to touch it up with some red paint and maybe get this little strip right here that I painted black. But for right now, I'm going to keep moving on. I'll do the touch-ups at the end. Before we do that front door, I want to get the front little fender piece bolted on there and get that squared away, because once we have the front door on, we won't have much room to work in there. Alright, so moving on to the front fender over here. If you guys saw my last video, I lopped off the bottom so that way it could clear our new 2x6 rocker. And the way that I have attached is I had a nut cert installed on the top end of this 2x6, so I can fit a 1/4 inch bolt through the backside right here. So basically it attaches the lower end of our front fender and it won't jiggle around at all. But I got our front fender flare removed for now, since we're going to have to install this, and it's going to go a little bit under that fender flare. And I also took off our little trim piece that goes right here. And as you can see with our new door armor over here, it does hang down where the existing front fender would normally go to. So we're going to have to mark that out and cut it. But basically we just got 4 holes to drill over here, and then we should be able to bolt this on. So I'm going to mock fit this into place. I'm going to get it pretty much flush to the end of the fender over here. Maybe leave a little bit of a gap. And you can see what a poor job they laser cut these out. They just went with a straight line, even though the fender does kind of curl over here. So not exactly the best fit on these. So once we get it where we like it, I'm going to mark out the holes. And then I'll also mark the bottom on each side where we're going to basically be cutting. And then I'll draw a straight line, and then we'll get that cut. Alright, so I got the holes drilled. I'm going to mock this up before I paint it, make sure everything fits. Looks like we're contacting this structural piece back there, so I'll have to cut down these bolts as well. That looks pretty good. I'll take this off and I'll wire wheel this with any surface rust, get that all clean, prime it in, paint on the back side, and I might hold off on doing the red paint until I get it bolted back on here. I'm not sure yet, but we'll get this all situated and then we'll be back. Alright, so off camera I painted up this bottom edge of the front fender with some paint quick and then bolted it on here so the fender is nicely in place. Also got our lower door armor all painted up. I didn't clear coat it yet because I'm going to do that when I finish touching stuff up. But now we're ready to bolt this in. I already went ahead and cut 2 bolts down, which are going to go over here. And then I just left them a little bit longer over here on the right side since there's really no obstruction. So now I'm going to put some seam sealer on the back side and we'll get this bolted on. Then I'll feed the nuts onto the back side. Now I'll go and snug these up. Alright, so with that fender piece squared away, let's move on to the front door and get that mounted. Alright, so I got the front door bolted on. There might still be a little adjusting I still have to do. I had to unbolt the front fender over here because that was kicked out way too much, so I'm going to have to adjust that mount later on and then finally fine-tune the doors. One thing I did notice is that this hole in the top right over here is going to be the same situation as back here, where you really can't get a nut on the back of that because it's so close to that hinge, unfortunately, so we might just have to cut it off short like what we did over here and just zip that in. So I'm going to get some sealer on this and then we'll start bolting it into place. So for the most part, we don't have to worry about bolt depth as long as it's not over 1 inch on the middle bolts. Over here on the door jamb, these 2 bolts on the outside, I cut those down so that way they're not so much of an eyesore, and same thing with the bottom right. Just going to leave everything a little bit loose until we get all the bolts in, and then we'll start tightening it up and then put some nuts on the back. Alright, so we got our lower door armor all bolted onto the passenger side over here, and I'm not too impressed with the quality, especially with the brand I went with. As you can see, there's some alignment issues, and it's not necessarily the door. It's because the bend marks in this door armor they made in the wrong places, and it totally screwed me up when I was drilling the holes for this, so unfortunately I can't adjust them really to line up. But if I were to do this when the doors were already on here and then start drilling the holes, I might be able to kind of save that, but unfortunately it's just going to be like that for now, and hopefully you won't see it from 20 feet away. But overall, it does look a lot better than just having gaping rust holes. So this side is pretty much rust free except for the rear quarter over there. I do have to go back and do a little bit of painting here and there and then clear coat these and everything like that, but it's just a lot of little time consuming stuff, so I won't include that in the video. But overall, hopefully this gives you an idea on how to install this lower door armor. Alright guys, that's going to be a wrap for today's video. I'm pretty happy now that I'm finishing up the passenger side here that I can start working on the driver's side and get this thing back on the road again. Hopefully you guys are able to follow along if you're installing this lower door armor as well. I'll post a link in the description below on a different brand of door armor, not this cheap stuff that I got since I had some alignment issues. So if you guys liked this video and found it helpful, make sure to like and subscribe to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel. If you guys have any questions or comments on how I install this or anything else about the Jeep, make sure you comment below and I'll be happy to answer. If you guys want to help support the channel, I got some Out Jeeping decals over in my Etsy store. I'll post that in a link below as well. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.